And I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Cindy Lane, who's leading the Blueprint for Literacy in Kansas, which is the largest workforce development project in the history of our state. As I introduce Dr. Lane, and where is Dr. Lane? Beside you. Oh, there, okay. As I introduce Dr. Lane, I thought I do need to thank Senator Molly Baumgardner. Without her, we wouldn't have a Blueprint for Literacy, so thank you for all your help in the session. Dr. Lane is highly recognized in her field. I first met her when she was a superintendent, where she spent a number of years in public education. And as a superintendent, she was a champion of higher education and actually created the Diploma Plus program because she recognized that the high school diploma was not enough and really incorporated college credit into the junior and senior year of high school and allowed students to graduate with not only a high school diploma, but also an additional credential. Dr. Lane was the chair of our Board Academic Affairs Standing Committee and was appointed to the Board of Regents. And then as we developed the Blueprint for Literacy, Dr. Lane came to me and said, I'd like to be considered as a candidate to lead this initiative. And I thought that was the very best idea that anyone has ever had in a long time. And so now she's a member of our team, and we're grateful to have her. Thank you, and help me welcome Dr. Cindy Lane.
Good afternoon, and I really appreciate that you all are also flexible, because presenting in front of a group that's hungry is never a good thing. So thank you. Chair Ballard, it's an honor to be here, and you can call me Cindy all you want. I enjoy working with you. And it's been a real thrill to work with Blake Flanders, both as a member of his board and now as one of his team, doing something that we think is one of the most important initiatives that the Board of Regents in higher ed has taken on. So thank you. Thank you, Susan, for the invitation to be here, and thank you to all of you. I look forward to this conversation. I hope it will be a conversation. We're doing some amazing things. I'd like to hear from you what you're doing and what you're wondering and how we can get better, because this is really about building a movement to help children learn. So today you can expect for me to talk about the economic imperative of literacy, not only here in Kansas, but in the MEC Midwest area and frankly across the nation. So I'm going to talk to you about that and hope to convince you, if you're not already there, about the economic imperative of this work. I also want to talk about higher ed and how this is a top priority for higher education. And you can see some of the things that we're doing in that arena. And then frankly, the Board of Regents' response to the challenges that we face. I too want to give a special thank you to Senator Baumgardner, who frankly should be up here co-presenting this with me, because we share this passion and we have worked side by side trying to make this work for kids. So I suppose I just hit the green button, is that right? Can change the slide? Okay, terrific. So the Blueprint for Literacy, or officially known as Senate Bill 438, was signed into law by Governor Kelly on April 25th, 24. And I highlight that for us here this morning because we are 5 months into the work, but we are moving at a speed that higher education is not accustomed to, because this is an urgent matter for our children. And so the Senate Bill 438 established the blueprint because it is an economic imperative. Kansas is experiencing unprecedented growth in high-skilled jobs. In fact, by the year 2030, we are anticipating adding 54,000 new high-skilled jobs that require 80% of which require a bachelor's degree or higher. And then if you look at the percentage of those jobs that require a credential beyond high school, a technical certificate, or an associate's degree, then those jobs, 90% of which are going to require high-skilled jobs with credentials. And at the same time, here in Kansas, and I'm going to show you in a minute, across our entire Midwest region, and frankly the nation, a third of our children either are not reading or don't read well. So I just want to let that hang for a minute. The economy is driving towards higher skilled jobs. To be part of that economy, you have to have higher skills, and yet a third of our children are not reading well. So let me just show some of the data so that you can see what I'm talking about. This slide represents the National Assessment of Education Progress over the last 50 years. And I just want you to pay attention to that arrow. Since 2020, we've been declining, and since the year 1990, we have the largest drop ever in the ability of our students in K-12 to read at or above grade level. And to go a little bit further about what that means, this slide shows you the percentages of students who are performing at what's called basic, proficient, advanced levels or below basic. So take a look at just that 2022 number where we have 39% of our fourth grade students who are not achieving basic. Basic means grade level work, but not completely solid in grade level work. So it means a student can do most of the work but still needs assistance from the educator to perform. So it's really getting students to the proficient level that says that the student is able to master the standards of that grade level content in reading on their own. So we have 39% of our children across the nation who are reading below basic, meaning not at grade level and needing more assistance from educators. So let's just go a little deeper. A lot of numbers on this slide. What I want you to pay attention to is that highlighted column starting with 72% of our Caucasian population across the nation are reading basic. That feels right until you remind yourself what basic means, that they are grasping many standards but not fully independent with that. And then just look down the different groups. As our demographics change, and they are here in Kansas, the population changes, we have to pay more attention to how everyone is doing. And we're struggling. We're struggling with students there. You could look at the Asian population across the nation, and they're doing better than the rest. But when you look at African American and Hispanic, and frankly, even a lot of our white kids, we are not where we need to be with getting them there. So I ask the question, is this sufficient to be able to address the economic needs of our nation and to fill those high-skilled jobs? And, I think that's a rhetorical question perhaps with this group. But it's not. And so we can look at it in two ways, driving the economy or frankly thinking about it as the lifelong impact this kind of situation has on individuals who just don't read well. So let's look at how we're doing as a cohort in the MEC area. How are we doing? This slide represents the average across the nation. So there's average score of 216 across the nation. And so you can see that for the most part, we're all kind of moving together in this work, performing average. The average for public schools is at 216 on the reading exam. So in the nation, we have 8 states that perform better than that. We have 38 states that are kind of like us, just right there in the middle, and 8 states in our nation that are doing poorly and not as well. And then you see the line in the little red box, that's Massachusetts, and I always like to highlight them because they always have seemed to find a way to be outperforming how the rest of us are doing. And then on the far end, that little bubble that's there, that's our Department of Defense education system. We could talk about why they might be doing better, but they're doing better. That's the reality. So let's just go a little bit deeper, and this shows our cohort, our MEC partnership, and the yellow line are above basic, so that's good. The proficient and advanced, that looks good for us, and it feels good. And the blue, though, are the children who are performing below grade level, below basic. So I just want to get rid of the yellow and have you look at the below basic as a group. This is our data from 2022. And as a collective, the best we're doing is that we have 25% of our students reading below basic. And then the most of us are somewhere above 30% reading below basic. I just feel kind of some of the oxygen leaving the room, right? So hence why we want to suggest to you that literacy should be an economic imperative and maybe be a central focus of what this group does collectively moving forward. I hope I've convinced you of that, but certainly the Kansas Board of Regents were convinced of that. So it's a real honor to be working for an organization under a leader who says that literacy is the top economic priority for our system. And certainly our legislators have also said that in their support of the blueprint and in the governor. Blake mentioned earlier that the Blueprint for Literacy is the largest workforce development initiative in the history of Kansas, and that's true. We have 46,000 educators in Kansas, 12,000 of which are in elementary school, and they all need some additional skills. So that this is an initiative to upskill our educators with the current science. And it connects directly to our Board of Regents strategic plan that focuses on helping families and supporting business and advancing economic prosperity. So you can see it makes a lot of sense for the Board of Regents to say literacy is a top priority. So let me talk to you a little bit about what the blueprint does. It's important to recognize that many states are working on this issue. Most states have a focus in their K-12 system on this issue. Few states, in fact, I don't know of another who's approaching this from the higher ed lens. So Senate Bill 438 and the Blueprint for Literacy in Kansas is a post-secondary focused initiative bringing the power of higher ed and universities to the table to help solve this challenge. And it's also revealing to us what our higher education faculty need in order to help us achieve this standard. So the science has just frankly changed, and I'm going to show you in a minute what the current science is, but I'm not expecting to teach you all to be elementary educators in literacy, but it's important to recognize as policymakers that the science has changed. In the year 2000, the National Reading Panel revealed the science of that time around 5 things that educators needed to teach kids. Phonemic awareness, that's the sounds, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. And so since then, educators have been doing those things, but it is the method in which we've been doing those that the science has now shown us has failed many of our kids. And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. But the blueprint attacks this problem it's really a schematic. And I'm really grateful that the legislators recognize that a law cannot be so prescriptive that there's no movement. So there's these broad requirements that are in the blueprint that allow for strategic thinking and plans to be built around each. In that first box, you'll notice that the law required the establishment of the Office of Literacy at the Board of Regents and the formation of an advisory committee. This committee is made up of appointees from various political groups and the governor's office, and it's also made up of educators that are in K-12 and higher ed, all working together to solve it. The law requires that we only teach the latest science called structured literacy in higher education, so that those undergraduates that are in teacher prep programs actually get taught what is necessary for our kids to learn to read. And you'd think that seems common sense, but I can tell you that up until this law was passed, we could identify some debunked strategies and methodologies that were still being taught in the higher ed system, even though the science changed in 2014 and said you should not do those things any longer. So the law requires only structured literacy. It requires that we have application courses in our undergraduate program. If you have questions about that, we can talk about it. But in essence, go beyond theory and teach the undergraduates actually how to do this work, not just talk about it. It requires that we review curriculum at the higher ed level on an annual basis. It requires that higher ed provide K-12 teachers who are currently in the classroom professional development and credentials in structured literacy. I'm going to go deeper into that one with you in a moment. And it requires that we look at data. Who's trained, who isn't trained, who's doing well, where are the school districts that need assistance, that kind of thing. And it also requires really what I think is one of the most transformative strategies, creation of centers of excellence in literacy that will be in every region of our state to provide support to educators and families. One of the things that I believe makes this really different than perhaps some other approaches is that we've identified some critical actions. And the first one is that we must collaborate. So the Board of Regents must collaborate with our State Board of Education. We must collaborate with our local school board so they understand what they need to do. And that seems like it wouldn't need to be said, but we found that it was necessary to have it in the law, so it's in there. And it's also a practice that we know works. As I've mentioned, it's focused on educator workforce professional learning for those who are already in the classroom, and it strengthens our undergraduate programs. And the advisory committee's role, they're not policy, but their role is powerful because it's all about developing strategies, monitoring what's happening, and recommending to all various policy groups the kinds of things that they need to be thinking about. So it really is about solving problems instead of looking at others to say, why aren't you doing this? I like to say it's time to move from pointing at perhaps pointing at higher ed about what we were not doing, pointing at K-12, where I spent 40 years about what we weren't doing then. We've agreed to stop that and to come to the table and to figure out how to solve it. So I thought structure might be of interest to you. I report directly to Dr. Flanders. This initiative sits directly under his authority and the Board of Regents. My office focuses on collaboration with our colleges of education. We collaborate with the State Department. We're working on partnerships with private groups that are focused in literacy. And of course, our community and technical colleges, our universities. It really is bringing everyone to the table to solve. And then advisory committee meets on a monthly basis, and they really are our accountability measure. What are we trying to accomplish? We want 100% of our elementary workforce, teacher workforce, including our paras, to achieve what we call a micro-credential in the science of reading structured literacy. And I'm going to talk to you about what that looks like momentarily. But the ultimate goal is this. 90% of our children need to be reading at or above grade level by the year 2033. In fact, the law even says, and underneath that, you need to have 50% of the students reading at proficient and advanced. Think about where we are. In Kansas, we're in just under 60% of our children reading that well now. We have 30%, a third of our kids who are below basic. But we've committed to figure out how to solve that. So our leading strategies include these three things. That micro-credential course, and I'll take you a little deeper into what that means momentarily. That plan for the centers. I'm also going to show you what we're thinking about there and what we're about to do there. And then this idea of a movement. A commitment that all of us have to bring our talents to the table to help our neighbors and to move forward. So that's an exciting work to see people say, I think I can help, and here's how. Let's talk a little bit about that micro-credential. It's a course, really. As this has been developed, it's not what we think about as micro. The university faculty committed early on that this has to be more than just a little go to a professional development workshop and then we say our teachers have what they need. So the unique thing about this course is that we have 7 public universities in Kansas that have educator prep programs, all 7. We have 17 independent colleges that have educator prep programs. and they're all working together. It's being led by the publics, but the independents are saying, we want to be part of this too, because they produce 20% of our teachers. So I want you to think about that a moment. This is not one university leading it. It is all 7 leading it with 17 collaborative partners offering a really high quality, high impact experience for teachers who are in the classroom. Here's what that's made up of in terms of the expectations. The course is being designed at the highest standards that are known across the nation, called the International Dyslexia Association's standards. Those aren't just for kids with dyslexia. They are the standards that all children need to learn to read well. We're having a third party who's an expert in the field at a national level review the course to make sure it's the best that we can possibly deliver. Teachers who take this course, leaders who take this course, if they're in Kansas, we will pay their tuition and they can earn graduate credits that they can use to move up on their salary schedules. The 7 institutions I mentioned who are leading this work have agreed to a market rate tuition so that there is one level of tuition that's charged for this course. And oh, by the way, the blueprint, because of the legislation, will pay that for the teacher, so there's no cost to them. And teachers will also get a stipend. The next box, 180 clock hours, is what we estimate this course will take to complete, so you can see why I say it's not micro at all. It really is in depth. And it focuses on not just knowing what to do, but actually being able to do this science of reading structured literacy with children in the classroom. So every educator who signs up for this course will have a personalized coach from a university faculty who's an expert in the field working with them to apply what they're learning with their children. So we think it's an amazing opportunity that's being crafted here. Just pause a moment. When I say structured literacy, what am I talking about? There's just a lot of words on this slide, but the thing to take away from it is that we now know that children have to have direct and explicit instruction in all that makes up a good reader to mastery in order to be proficient and advanced on the NAEP. In past methodologies, we would tell kids, well, if you don't know the word, just look at the picture and guess what the word is, or skip the word. And we also would keep kids in what was called level text, so that they would receive a text based on what they could read, but they never had the opportunity to read grade level material. So no wonder our kids aren't doing well on the assessments, right? Because they're never reading grade level material. So this approach, structured literacy, eliminates all of that, focuses on teaching children grade level skills directly and explicitly until they master that. And that's why it's so complicated for our teachers, because it's a very different kind of approach. This slide just shows you in that course that's being designed all the different, we call them modules and components of it. So a teacher will have instruction in all of these areas and receive coaching in all of these areas. If someone tells you it's easy to teach a child to read, I want you to remember this slide, because it requires all of these skills at a high level. And for veteran teachers who may already have some of these skill sets, they can test out. And so that personalized approach and personalized coaching meets the teachers exactly where they are. Our second big strategy is this idea of having centers of excellence in literacy across our state. We believe that we need to get the highest quality education, training, and support as close to communities and educators and families as possible. And so the blueprint required the advisory committee create a plan for 6 centers of excellence. We've decided we need 7, and that those centers will serve as the place to go when you need support, but also, even more importantly, they're a network of resources that come to the communities throughout the state to provide education to teachers who are in the classroom, to support building leaders and school board members with what they're grappling with, and to help families. So in Kansas, here's how we've organized those 7 centers. You might look at western Kansas and think, oh my gosh, one center for that entire, we call it catchment area. But we identified where the centers will be located based on access to the university expertise, but also population density. So our university in that far western quadrant, Fort Hays State, they do have a large territory, but it's based on their population. So the challenge for that center is going to be to network services into the community all across that catchment area. And then as we get more dense here on the eastern side of the state, we may not have as much geography to cover, but I can assure you the intensity of the work is there because we're looking at our urban core and what's needed. And we've analyzed where the children are doing well and where they need help. And so the centers will pinpoint their interventions in that direction. Just to reframe what the centers are all about, they're about providing education to educators so that they have the skills they need to help every child learn to read, that we're working with leaders, building principals, superintendents, and school board members so they also have the resources they need. This is not just the classroom teacher challenge. And then families of children who may be struggling to read can get support from the center, either at the center or the center comes to them to provide evaluation, assessment, and work with the local school district to help provide intervention plans. So those are just the things that we're doing in the first 5 months of this project, and it will continue to evolve. The plan for the centers is going before our Board of Regents tomorrow to get their feedback, and we hope they'll approve it in December, and then it goes to our legislators for feedback and investment so that we can make sure we can deliver on this work. You might be curious to know how much did Kansas invest. We've got $10 million to do this work. We probably will need a little bit more resource, but it'll be less than 20. How can we do it for a less than $20 million investment? Because the universities are investing their expertise and their talent as partners with the legislators and the governor in this work. So we're pretty excited about it. It's a heavy lift, but it's been remarkable to me as a former K-12 educator to see our higher ed partners step up and say, we can do more and we want to do more. How can we help? And actually bringing their resources to the table. Senator Baumgartner, anything I missed? As we go to questions, I'd like to offer you the first opportunity.
I think you've done a wonderful job, and let's just answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Chair, would you like me to just take questions from the floor? Okay, over here and then over here. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm Gary Case with Ohio. In the last budget, Governor DeWine created the program called Science of Reading, but first I've heard about structured literacy. I'm curious to find out if what's the difference between the two type of programs, or if they're basically an extension of each other. But my main question is that I find it interesting that you have this under Board of Regents and not Department of Education. Because in Ohio, it's under Department of Education and Workforce, but we're involved from our agency for teacher training at our campuses. I was curious if you could offer some insight about how the decision was made to have this within the Board of Regents.
I'd be glad to. Let me answer your first question first. Science of Reading, as I mentioned, was a body of work. We have researchers that's all they do from the National Institute of Health and downward, and have established those 5 pillars. Those were recognized back in 2000. But as those scientists continue to study how our brain works and looking at the results in classrooms, they realized they were missing something. So in 2014, they published the structured literacy approach, and that's where that direct and explicit piece has to come in. The other approaches that we were using that were science related truly did teach kids to guess. And if you know kids, like I know kids in my own family, if you give them an easy option, they'll take it, right? So structured literacy requires that they understand the secret formulas around phonics and how words fit together and what words mean, and it's highly directed and explicit there. So that's the big change. So as you go back to your state, I would encourage you to ask, are we still talking about this global science? Are we talking about the direct and explicit approach? Why higher ed? We're working in collaboration with our State Department of Ed. They have some initiatives that they're also doing in training. We felt like we needed to come to the table as partners, and because we're the ones responsible for educating educators and training educators, and so that's why this particular blueprint focuses primarily on higher ed. But we're also working with our State Department and influencing. Where we are right now, we're supporting a lot of the work that they're doing, but we're creating long-term sustainability. So after their investments have been depleted, we'll continue. So that was the rationale.
So just one follow-up. So you actively pursued this and convinced the legislature that Board of Regents was the best home for this?
We did, and I had a strong partner, Senate Education, that understood that too. I think part of what we theorized is that K-12 was struggling. They haven't figured out how to move the needle on this, so therefore we've got to help, and so we stepped in to do that. That's a great question, Molly.
The other component to that is we took almost a medical approach. You have to stop the bleed. You can't continue every year to graduate students from the universities with an elementary ed degree that don't know how to teach it. So if we're not teaching them properly, think of it in healthcare. If you're not teaching them properly how to stop the bleed, then we're never going to get to that solution.
The other thing it's allowed us to do is uncover in a productive way what our faculty need. Many of our faculty have been in the field for quite some time. So we're learning, have they made the shift to structured literacy, and what do they need? And then we're also talking about how much clinical experience is really needed to do this. Student teaching is a model of, I would say, of old. We need to rethink how we're preparing teachers to actually work with children and deliver. Yes.
I'm just trying to, we were having a similar issue in North Dakota. The literacy dropped after COVID, basically, and but I'm trying to have my own experience here. I'm now a grandfather, but I remember when my kids were going to school, I'm a former DOD guy. A lot of the schools were going whole language versus phonics. Is that probably what you're talking about?
Whole language is the guessing game.
Yeah, right. That's what it was?
When
Yeah.
I was in school, probably a long time before you, it was whole language. It was really flashcard reading, and
Yeah.
the suggestion was just memorize words. And
Right.
so that's evolved.
So that's what you're
But
talking
this is more than phonics. It is phonics, but it's also deep understanding of sounds and how words fit together and vocabulary and all of that. So we like to shorthand it of just teach phonics. It's phonics plus.
So where I'm going is it'd be fascinating to see the long-term curves, probably normalized for socioeconomic status. Like, were we doing better literally teaching reading in the 1960s and 70s and it fell off? Or is this a socioeconomic community, single parenthood? I mean, it seems there's a lot of complex factors, which is why when you mention the DOD schools, there's so much structure there. I mean, literally, if your kids don't show up for school, they knock on the door of the sergeant and like, where's your children? So any thoughts on that of other external factors that might be contributing to this drop-off?
Part of the methodology that was being used prior to 2014 was designed on high-income families and children. And so the science worked for those families who have rich vocabulary and lots of books in the home and provide their children a lot of experience outside of school. I would say to you that in the 60s, we didn't look at the data, so we probably don't know. But what we do know is that the majority of families, middle class and lower economic class students, don't have as much rich outside of school experience that really compels schools to have a more direct, explicit approach. This is good for all children. Great question, Carol.
You mentioned the DOD. You mentioned before, you say about the DOD schools, why they're doing so much better?
I don't really have that insight into those schools. I just wanted to show you the data. That's a great question we need to ask. It may be the structure. Structure is beneficial, and that's what the science is telling us that kids now need in reading. And also, part of what we also need to analyze is what we're going to do for children in upper grades who aren't reading, what we're doing for college students who can't read, and so we'll be weaving our learning and strategies in that direction. Carol.
Okay, I will go with Carol, and if the questions and the answers are brief, we have time for 2 more.
Yes, ma'am.
Carol?
Okay, I kind of have 2 questions. So the first question, and just to give some perspective, my professional background was in teaching languages, Spanish, English, ELL, remedial English, etc. And then I shifted my career to educational technology. So one of my concerns, and we just passed a structured literacy bill, similar, not the programming, but we have the similar bill in Michigan that we just have passed. So excited to see us going back to more of this very direct instructional approach to language. But one of my questions or concerns is, I don't feel like these laws are taking into account the societal shift of technology. So when I was a kid, there were newspapers at my house, there were magazines, there was a lot of what I call incidental reading going on. And I saw my parents actually reading, and kids don't have that. So even before they get to school today, even in a higher income home, I would challenge that kids are not seeing adults reading. And when they do, they see them on the phone scrolling and don't realize, what's going on there. They may not be read to as often because of that. They don't even have the cereal box in front of them, maybe. And we saw that shift even in this past election, where our younger folks are getting all of their information through video, podcasts, they're listening, they're watching, things like that. So I think there's a real challenge when we talk about this literacy instruction. Like, I haven't heard us talking about that piece of it, and I don't know the data behind it or how it all fits in, but I am concerned. And when we set our targets, what you're talking about, 2030, 2033, I mean, that's another almost 10 years from now, with 10 years more of technology. We already kind of scratched the surface on AI today. So I'm not against reading or literacy, but I'm just wondering how that fits in, or if that was even part of the conversation.
Two responses, and I'll try to be brief. One, remember I mentioned the blueprint sounds like all the details were figured out in the law, but it was purposely crafted not to be that. So we have these broad areas, and the advisory committee's challenge is to take on topics like you just mentioned to try to solve for that. So that's a future thing. Second comment is we've got 4 years to get our teachers trained. 2030. So you said 10 years. We've got 9 years to try to improve outcomes, but I can tell you that this committee and the board won't be satisfied if we don't see upward movement pretty class. So the theory is lead indicator, train the educators, and then the assessments will come. And then as those assessments evolve to be more than just print assessments, then I think we can identify what's necessary there.
And then can I just quickly ask about teacher training? Like, are all teachers getting it, or
Could I
just
have you
language?
hold, because there's someone else that has it up, and so I'll do it, before I do a second, I'll have to do one, okay?
Thank you. I was just wondering, is it just for elementary school teachers? Is it just for reading language arts teachers, or is every teacher getting this training?
This first credential is designed for pre-K through 8, starting with infant toddler. And then we will be designing a next series of courses for educators in all content areas, because if you can't read, you also have challenges in all content. So we'll be building opportunities for deeper learning across the board.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I love the presentation. If the child is diagnosed as dyslexic, then what do you do to intervene? And how do you help them as they move forward? Our son was diagnosed when he was in the 3rd grade, and we hired a special ed teacher to work with him. And he graduated from high school with a 4.3.
Yeah.
But he did things differently.
Right.
But his reading skills, when it was a math problem, he could do fantastic. But if it was a reading math problem, it took him more time.
Certainly. So the Centers of Excellence will have expertise around assessment and evaluation, and their job is to take the plan for that individual child back to the school district and help them implement that. And then the build capacity of that young person, because that dyslexia is lifetime. Their brains are wired differently. Some of us have a little bit of that as well in our work. So we want to build the capacity of the young person to also know what I need in order to be successful. But it's that partnership.
All right, very, very nice. Thank you. Can we
Thank you all
applaud?
very much.